Okay, so I am 45 this year and I think I'm in pretty decent shape. I also used to be the editor of Men's Fitness and I've done everything from kayak ultra marathons to strongman competitions, and I think that's really helped me stay in shape sustainably while also having a full-time job, a whole bunch of hobbies and a 6-year-old. So in this video I'm going to talk about my advice for doing that. We're going to start with maybe the most important one, which is don't get injured. So this is pretty good advice at any stage of your life, but it definitely gets more important when you get older and you don't bounce back from injuries quite as fast. And I'll be honest, I've had a couple of injuries from doing jiu-jitsu, but never any bad ones at the gym. And I think that basically comes down to a couple of things. Firstly, I always warm up properly. I've got an upper body warm-up and a lower body warm-up. They take about 5 minutes each and I do them every single time I go to the gym. I also usually jog to the gym, so I'm already kind of warm by the time I get there. Secondly, I pick movements to do that are super low risk and reasonably high reward. So I still do box jumps occasionally to get fired up at the start of a workout, but I don't do them for lots of reps because if you're fatigued and old, it can be quite easy to tear your Achilles tendon on the landing. I also don't do bench as heavy as I used to because I think you can get similar results with stuff like dips and press-ups with a lot less strain on your body and your shoulders in particular. Thirdly, I don't ever do 1 rep maxes anymore. I used to have a pretty decent deadlift and squat. My bench was terrible, but I've stopped chasing both of those things and I mostly do 5 or more reps in each set these days. I do this because it's really easy to injure yourself when you're chasing a PB. But I still do big compound movements because my second bit of advice is focus on big moves and big sets. So I only actually go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week and I work out for about 40 minutes a time, which means I have to stay pretty focused if I want to cover everything I'm going to hit. And so the 2 ways I do that are to focus on big compound movements and to do everything in supersets to make the best use of my time. So compound movements might include stuff like squats or strongman movements, but they might also include stuff like press-ups or pull-ups. They're basically movements that use a bunch of muscle groups rather than just isolating 1 or 2. And I still do isolation movements, but I use them for accessory work rather than as the main focus of my workout. And supersets just means doing 2 or more exercises without stopping. So if you've seen my earlier video about training, you know I'm a big fan of antagonistic supersets where you work 1 set of muscles and then the opposing one. But recently I've been playing around with German volume training where I'll do 6 reps of a heavy move, then 12 reps of a slightly lighter one, then 25 of something pretty easy to just get a whole bunch of reps in on 1 body part. It's pretty fun and it's a pretty efficient way to train, but I think the real key is to combine movements so you don't spend half your workout looking at your phone. And then the flip side of making workouts short and intense is do a lot of NEPA. So what I mean by NEPA is non-exercise physical activity. And that basically just means doing a lot of moving around that isn't technically exercise. So for me that means playing around with my 6-year-old, but it might also mean just choosing to walk places when you could get a cab or a train, or doing DIY, or like helping your neighbours with their shopping. The benefit of NEPA is that you can do it without needing to change into gym clothes or get into the gym mindset, and also that it can burn a bunch of calories without encouraging you to snack like going for a run or doing a HIIT workout might. It's also just a really nice way to chill out. There are a bunch of places near my house where I can get into some greenery pretty easily, and I find that taking a walk in the woods or the park is like one of the ways I do my best thinking. And kind of another way to do this is find a physical activity you enjoy. So confession time, I hated sports at school. I was really bad at football and rugby. I always got picked last and I always ended cross-country runs near the back with the kids who weren't even trying. But I was kind of lucky because I got into Batman comics quite early in my life and I always wanted to be the kind of person who knew a load of martial arts and physical skills. So for me, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling and judo are just really fun and I will always do them as much as I can, and that gives me a whole load of moderately high intensity exercise that I do every single week. In the past I've done stuff like gymnastics and parkour and bouldering, and honestly I would do any of them a lot more if I could. So if you've never found a sport that you actually like, then my best advice to you is think about what you might kind of want to be good at and just give it a shot. Or just try a bunch of stuff and see what fits your personality. There is still a ton of sports and even ways of training that I don't really like, but I've tried dozens to find the few things that I can do throughout my life. And this also works with 80-20 eating. So a lot of people talk about eating well 80% of the time, but not many people are that clear about what they actually mean by that. Does that mean like as a percentage of every week or every month or what? Personally, I work well when I've got small, manageable goals, and so I break it down like this. You probably eat about 21 meals a week, and 80% of that is about 17. So I try to eat well for about 17 meals a week, which leaves me about 4 when I don't worry about it too much. And by well, what I mean is that I get at least 20 grams of good quality protein and at least 1 serving of veggies in that meal. I don't worry too much about carbs, but I do tend to eat more of them on days that I'm training hard. And that's honestly quite sustainable. sustainable. I tend to have eggs and some sort of vegetable for breakfast pretty much every day, and I quite often have leftovers for lunch. So that means I don't have to plan too hard to be eating pretty well for most of the week. I also find that this gives me a lot more flexibility than having like one cheat day or whatever. So if I get stuck somewhere with no good options, or I just really fancy a pizza, then it's not much of an issue. I also don't ever drink calories. During the day, I basically drink black coffee, tea, and water, and then in the evenings, I might have like 2 beers a week. And obviously you can be more or less strict on this stuff than I am, but it's something I try and maintain for my whole life rather than go through like bulking and cutting phases, so I'm not too hard on myself. And that's something you should probably do if you're going to follow the next bit of advice, which is to start early. And okay, this is probably the one you're not going to want to hear, because the truth is that the reason I'm in pretty decent shape is that I've been doing this for a long time. I didn't start really lifting until I was 30, but I did martial arts and bodyweight workouts for years before that. And there's definitely evidence that it's easier to put muscle back on if you've been in good shape before. But it's also easier to stay in shape than it is to get in shape in the first place. If your work capacity is high and you can lift quite a lot of weight, then you can get a whole bunch of work done in a relatively short amount of time. So the bad news is that if you want to get in shape in like 16, 12 or even 8 weeks, you're going to have to do a whole ton of hard work and be super strict about what you eat and drink. But the good news is that if you want to get in shape in a year or two, then you can take things a lot more steadily and lay foundations that will keep you in shape for a long time. So if you're in your 20s or 30s, start now. Don't think of it as a quick fix, but think of it as something you're doing for the long haul. But if you're in your 40s, 50s or 60s, then it's definitely not too late. If you start training now, then in a year or two you can be in better shape than you'd ever thought possible and lay foundations for the rest of your life. And if you're wondering how you're supposed to fit all this stuff into your life, then you might be interested in how I did it when I suddenly had a kid to look after and a whole bunch of work to do. And you can learn more about that right here. Thanks very much for watching.